The Northeast utility NSTAR merger is under scrutiny. We have an extended conversation with a Connecticut native and national journalist who is watching every move. Reuters editor Rob Cox tells us how the merger might affect our rates and our service. Also, Connecticut Republicans are in the holiday spirit. We're going to take a look at the remarkable success they have had this season, helping those in need. And Senator Richard Blumenthal has a year in D.C. under his belt. We have a conversation with him on how it's going. Welcome to The Real Story. I'm Lori Perez. As the governor's two-storm panel wraps up testimony and begins to craft its recommendations to strengthen Connecticut's utility infrastructure, the merger of Northeast Utilities, the parent company of CL&P, and Boston-based NSTAR continues slowly. The merger is under considerably more review now. Rob Cox is a Connecticut native and a U.S. editor for Reuters who has written a series of articles examining the joining of the two power companies.
If you thought Connecticut Light and Power was not accountable when it was dealing with Irene and after Halloween, it's not going to get any more accountable now that its CEO is going to be based in Boston.
Reuters financial journalist Rob Cox says the NU-NSTAR merger is one of the longest delayed mergers he's ever seen, indicating to him that Massachusetts regulators are taking time to review the pros and cons. His issue is that Connecticut regulators have waived their rights to review the move, even though the benefits to Connecticut are unclear.
If you look at the regulatory documents that CL&P or Northeast Utilities has filed in the case, they've said that there'll be something like $750 million of cumulative cost savings over the next 10 years. 40% of those will accrue to ratepayers in Massachusetts. It's kind of interesting in just the omission of anything about Connecticut. I mean, it doesn't tell you what Connecticut's going to get, and you assume that a lot of that's going to go to shareholders. So I would say, actually, the barn, is the horse is bolted on this one.
Connecticut customers should be worried about whose interests will be guarded if Massachusetts regulators are in charge. And that while Connecticut regulators have recently said they'd like to take a role in reviewing the fusing of the two companies, Cox says it might be too late.
Now, as far as the PRA, look, they've waived their rights. It's going to take something more than that. It's going to take something like special legislation, which, by the way, the governor's office has told me, and I've written about, that they were considering. I don't know what's happened to that, but they have basically left it to the Massachusetts public utility regulators to make the decision. But they are really only, they only should care about Massachusetts ratepayers.
As a captive customer base for utilities that are regional monopolies, regulators should be the first and last line of defense for ratepayers. In Connecticut, Cox says regulators have been failing to thoroughly review this merger and failing to manage CL&P up to this point.
It's not that different, if you will. Think about the financial crisis, what happened with the banking industry. We had a complete failure of the SEC, Federal Reserve, all the other banking regulatory authorities to keep an eye on the investment banks, keep an eye on the Citigroups and the Bank of Americas of the world, and we almost went into an absolute financial apocalypse. As a result of that, what happened? Well, we passed the Dodd-Frank Act in Washington, which is a complete reform of the regulatory apparatus. I think something like that is going to have to happen in Connecticut.
It remains to be seen what the future of power will look like in the state. Unfortunately, it seems for the time being, Connecticut customers are powerless.
The only basis on which we can judge whether they're doing a good job with their monopoly is whether or not our rates go down or up. And I'm afraid the writing is very clearly on the wall that our rates are going to go up. Now, you tell me how that can happen when you've created efficiencies. The only way is you've handed those efficiencies off to the market. Now, I'm a red-blooded capitalist, don't get me wrong, but this isn't capitalism. This is monopoly capitalism. It's a completely different kettle of fish.
Up next, a conversation with Connecticut's freshman Senator Richard Blumenthal on life and lessons in D.C.